Thanks again, everybody, for joining. I know we have people from all over the globe that signed up for this, so pretty international, global audience here, which I think is indicative of the topic that we're gonna touch upon today. So the first thing I want to do is introduce our speakers for this fireside chats. We have folks from Glasgow and then also from Quebec. So first, Gavin Smith leads Glasgow's technology innovation ecosystem for the Glasgow City Council. He works at the intersection of startups, industry, universities, and government to drive inclusive economic growth. His work focuses on strengthening Glasgow's priority sectors, including advanced manufacturing, clean tech, fintech, health innovation, while positioning the city as a global connected tech hub. He plays a key role in shaping the cluster development, supporting scale-ups, and aligning local strengths with national and international opportunities. And Richard Chenier. Richard is General Manager for Quebec Tech, the organization that represents and connects Quebec's technology ecosystem. He's an advisor to Canada's National Research Council, and he works closely with startups, scale-ups, and policymakers, as well as ecosystem partners to accelerate Quebec's innovation, strengthen their sector clusters, and support many of the company's growth across the province. He has a lot of experience in ecosystem development and public policy innovation, and he brings a data-driven and collaborative perspective on how regions can translate local strengths to global competitiveness. So welcome and thank you both for joining this panel today. I want to start sort of with a quote, which I think sort of sets a little bit of the context by Harvard economist Michael Porter. He once said, "Competitive advantage is created and sustained through a highly localized process." He went on to say that clusters represent a way of thinking about location, challenging much of the conventional wisdom about how companies compete. So today's conversation is really about what those ideas look like in practice, how regions can identify their strengths and translate those to local advantages, both on not just on the local, but also national and then also the global stage as well. So initially, maybe a broad question, but I want to ask both of you, how do you define what a sector strength is for both Quebec and Glasgow? And what signals do you look for to truly determine that that's a sector that's an advantage for your community versus sort of something that's of hype or that you go chase after? Maybe I'll start with you, Gavin.
Sure, no problem. So I think the first thing to say, and this may be a moot point, but it wasn't always the case, was that we view our tech ecosystem through a regional lens, although the kind of, Glasgow as a top major urban metropolis drive the vast majority of innovation startup activity. We look at everything through a regional lens. So to give you an example, Glasgow is about 650,000 inhabitants, but city region hosts 1.8 million, which is the third of the population of Scotland, a third of the business base. So in terms of the economies of scale, it made more sense to us to view it and to promote it from that perspective. We tend to reflect sectors that align our broad capabilities to UK government's modern industrial strategy. So that's mainly for targeted support, investment and policy purposes. Currently, government's focused on what they call the IS8, which is kind of 8 broad sectors driving future growth, including areas like advanced manufacturing, life sciences, digital and enabling technologies. But for the past few years at regional level, we've doubled down in clusters. So by that, I mean where we have a dense concentration of companies, research and support services, and we have that proximity and collaboration, which allows us to focus on a niche within a sector. So for example, medtech or an appropriate layer like that. And we're kind of fortunate to have a regional intelligence hub who have done a pair of work over the past 12 months to analyse city region specialisms in relevant sectors and industries, including identifying local organisations that are driving that growth. And they've kind of built an in-house analytical framework, which has been endorsed by partners to sort of look at the ecosystem over 3 layers. So they look at the business ecosystem, the investment ecosystem, and the skills and enabling infrastructure ecosystem. And that has used a variety of different data sets from real-time industrial clusters, which is a kind of modern rewriting of SIC codes, if you like, to more accurately reflect the kind of modern economy. We look at higher education stats, from agency level there. We look at Office for National Statistics information, and we also look at deal room data like company landscape, spin out and investment data as well. So I think the point I would make around that is there's not a universal approach to defining clusters. I mean, even government acknowledges that those broad sectors I pointed out are not evenly distributed all across the UK, for example. So cluster work has to be highly specific to the strengths of your region, needs to align with a specific plan and address kind of barriers related to R&D and skill provision infrastructure. So both governments that we work with, which is both Scottish Government and UK Government, try to foster an environment where these regional clusters can thrive and become globally competitive. But we're going to have a sort of deep analysis over the 3 layers to allow us to pick out, I suppose, and back the relative winners in that landscape.
Richard?
Yeah, it's always a hard question because some regions, sometimes the challenge with technologies is we are following sometimes the hypes, and we are following global tendencies, and sometimes it's a major obstacle to choose which will be the next wave, what will be where we can win with our economy. So Quebec, it's a small region, so 9 million of citizens on a large territory. And I think and I believe that we should avoid these hypes. Because the thing is, if you want to compete with larger economy as United States and China, so we cannot win on them. So they have deeper pockets, they have a strong economy, they are everywhere in the world. So in my mind, to build our ecosystem, there's 2 different forces that you have to analyze. The first one is your technical and your different scientific strengths. So, because if you want to build a strong tech ecosystem, you need a lot of talent. You need research. So, and in different regions in the world, so you can see where your strengths are and on which the kind of talent that you can build your own economy. The other thing is, what's your main strength on an economical perspective? So for example, here in Quebec, so there's a strong tendency for fintech. That's great globally, but we are not a major hub in fintech. So I'm not sure that it's a good idea to focus on this. But we are very good with natural resources in mining, in forestry, in energy, in healthcare, and so on. So, and if you combine these 2, your different strengths, so your economic strengths and also your talent pool, I think you can build a stronger economy and you can win in different sectors, in different areas, if you are managing this.
You mentioned, I'll say with you, you mentioned some sectors there like healthcare, et cetera, that are make sense for Quebec, right? Like, how do you ensure that those type of technologies are set up for the next 10 years and that you're not, they're not moving out or going away, and that you do have the infrastructure there, the support organizations? So how are you guys thinking about the future for maintaining these sector growths?
You can go, Gavin. Is it for me?
Sorry.
Either. Maybe you say with you, Richard, and then we can go back to that.
Okay, so the thing is, I think in my mind, so we have to focus on what will be relevant in 25 or 50 years and so on. For example, healthcare, we know that we will need healthcare for the rest of our lives and for the next generations and so on. So if you are focusing on different sectors where you think that it will still be relevant in the future years and for the rest of your life or your history, I think this is the way that you should and to choose some very specific areas. For example, we are very good with natural resources here in Quebec because we have a lot of forestry, we have mining and so on. And we are sure that in 25 years and in 50 years, we will need natural resources because we need all of these resources everywhere. Same thing with energy. So if you build technologies to be stronger in these areas, I think you should avoid tendencies, trends, and so on, and you will not miss the train. So put your effort to build where you are already strong and what you are already need for the next few years, and build technologies for these sectors.
Gavin?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with you on terms of the broad sectors have to make sense for your individual location. We always try and map, I suppose, those sectors to what our missions are as a city region, and that at a very broad level is about tackling poverty and health and long-rooted health issues, kind of boosting prosperity and fighting climate change. So for me, whatever flavour of sector you decide to carve out and so on needs to address those deep-seated challenges you have at that city region level. And so that for me kind of elevates what your priorities should be. And another thing I think I would say is often the way the government defines their priorities is at a very top level, right? So I mean, they're so broad, life sciences, advanced manufacturing. I mean, I think, you go around to any comparable region or city around the world, they would say they're good at all those things, right? We do life sciences, we do so. That doesn't really tell you much if everyone's saying the same thing. So for me, it's all about, with my marketeer's hat on, it's going down at least one or two levels, or 2 layers down to find out what is your point of differentiation and can you back that up with evidence? Do you have not just the business capability, but do you have industry and academia and government working together? Do you have the research that's helping to feed that? Do you have the skills pipeline coming through to the university and colleges to feed it? So it's how all these pieces integrate together and the way a proper cluster should be to help you address those broader missions, I think, is how you circle, or you square that circle, if you like.
Cool. Yeah, I'll come back to your comment on how you guys put together as one of the questions. I wanted to avoid an AI question, but I actually think it's actually probably appropriate to ask it sort of related to the last couple of questions, and that is obviously like everybody wants to be AI first, and there's many components of AI, right, within the different generative AI, et cetera. And so, how are each of you looking at the broad AI as a sector like we should foster? Are you looking at specific parts of the value chain within AI? Are you looking at it holistically? Are you looking at it cautiously? And what does that mean from from the city council standpoint, right? And what does that mean from like NRC standpoint as they look to sort of, be an AI forward community? How are you guys looking at that? Richard?
For me, AI, it's not a sector; it's a tool. First of all, and I think when you think about AI, you have to think about what kind of purposes that AI should serve and should support your needs as on an economic perspective, and also for to support our different challenges within our society. Aside of this, so I believe actually we are at the highest point of the hype related to AI. So in one of our job as an advisor for our government, for policies makers, and so on, is to anticipate which will be the next wave. And I believe that the next wave actually is how we can create physical object embedded with AI. What will be the humanoids within our economy and things like these. So and I think the future for startups is those who will build around hardware. So physical infrastructure to support all of these AI. So AI using need a lot of energy, they need a lot of support, and actually I'm not sure that the infrastructures, our actual infrastructure are not ready to support all of these calculations. So and I think for those who are actually building and thinking about their own economy, they should focus on the next wave, not on the actual one. Yeah. So the actual one is at maturity, it's more a commodity. There's still some research related to AI, but it's mainly a common tool.
Well, let me say on that, how do you get the government to buy into something that is sort of future looking, right? That they can't wrap their heads around just yet. As an advisor, how do you articulate that?
It's hard because when you are at the highest point, where we are actually with AI, so everybody is looking for AI because it's trendy, it's the hype of the moment, and so on, and policies makers, government, and so on wants to be part of the party. You know what I mean? But it's not popular to anticipate what will be the next hype, the next wave within the next 5-10 years. And it's not very popular as a politician, for example, to explain we will invest in humanoids, for example, and physical objects using AI, because it's not the tendency of the moment. Yeah. So there's a lot of educations to do. And we should, and actually this is one of our challenges. So we are very strong in AI. AI was mainly invented in my city, in Montreal. So we are very strong in AI, but at the same time, so now everyone in the world using AI. So what will be our next step?
Yeah, Kevin, what's your take?
Well, I think there's so many layers to unpick there, isn't it? So, I mean, from an infrastructure perspective, we're currently looking at investment in green data centres, potentially in Scotland, with things like vacant and derelict land, they're not getting used, and trying to put in the infrastructure pieces so that we've got the capability to support, this wave of AI-driven companies that are going to we're going to experience over the next couple of years. And I think so that's one layer, and so that's a very top level, and that's getting done at a national level rather than a regional level. Although Glasgow and Edinburgh will have a part to play on that. And then there's a company side, which is, yeah, I would agree with you on the combination with hardware, Richard, because we in particular work with an outfit here called the Smart Things Accelerator Centre, and their whole thing is about running cohorts of companies that basically have embedded and connected devices that are using sensors to basically, take the temperature or take different elements of business conditions, and then use software to solve particular problems. And so for me, the most interesting companies are those that have a combination of hardware plus AI-driven software solutions that sit as a layer on top of that. Those ones are really interesting, I think, from a perspective going forward. And I think the other piece is skills as well. So how do we equip, a broad section of our citizens to have that basic capability of, whether you want to call it vibe coding or AI-driven skills and so on, that maybe is not being addressed in schools or in universities and colleges at the moment. So we're looking very closely into things like no code. We just started a program called Glasgow No Code, which is trying to train a cohort of citizen developers in AI coding across colleges and across different parts of the community. So it's trying to, almost like from an innovation perspective, those people who've got really good business ideas, but they're not able to productize it because they're not software developers or they don't have that level of funding. But how can they help get those ideas into reality? And how can we support companies in that regard as well to get to MVP and to get to companies quickly? So I think there's a number of different layers where we can support around the edges in collaboration with government and other agencies in that front.
Cool.
If I may add something, Darren, is I think the challenge right now for our region, our economy, is more related to adoption of AI tools more than developing new AI tools. And for startups, I think there are still some areas where they can win, but they have to be very niche, very specific, to go deeper on a specific niche to provide some solution to very specific markets, very specific needs, aside of trying to compete ChatGPT or Gemini and so on. So this race is behind us. So now it's to be deeper than the other ones.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Gavin, you sort of mentioned earlier that it takes a community to help foster some of these sectors. In practice, could you give us some examples or a example of, within some of these, you mentioned eight sort of sectors that you guys are fostering, where you've been able to collaborate both government, universities, startups to help grow that sector, to help foster the startups within that?
So the company I mentioned just there, the Smart Things Accelerator Centre, STACK, is a real good example of that. So we have a partnership between the council, this organisation called STACK, the Smart Things Accelerator Centre, and that includes significant kind of UK government investment. And that was launched nearly 2 years ago. And the idea there is to aim at transforming Glasgow into Europe's leading kind of smart things and IoT innovation hub. So Stack run like an 18-month kind of long program, founder focused program, to help early stage companies, scale quickly. And it gives them access to things like deep technical support, product development labs, media labs, investment opportunities, and high caliber networking opportunities. So we saw an opportunity there to help reinforce that cluster. And they now have about 120 plus companies running, over 6 cohorts there. So they've just run them in cohorts. And that initiative is supported by executives who have worked for leading corporates like Dyson, BlackBerry, Motorola, Volvo Cars, etc. And actually, the CEO of Stack, this company Stack, adapted a business model that he first experienced when he was in Waterloo in Canada. Would you believe, in the Toronto Waterloo Tech Corridor? And you think this is a model that would adapt very well to Glasgow and to Scotland. And I think that's also really important as well, that sometimes you can get very into the navel gazing of where you live in your particular location and so on. There's always really good global examples, I think, that you can adapt to fit your own model as well. So that has been a really successful venture running over the last couple of years, and that's helped build out their offers. So, that's government and private sector and academia working together. They've now launched an investment syndicate off the back of that as well, so they can back the most promising of their high-tech companies going through their cohorts with some good seed money as well. So they have a pot of £1 million this year. They hope to expand that to £15 million next year. So kind of putting their money where their mouth is, if you like, in terms of helping those companies scale. And they also have quite a cool thing, a boutique sourcing model where they have industry partnerships with leading firms like Volvo Cars, with Sonos and so on, for these local firms to design products for these global firms, which allows them access into the global markets really quickly. So starting to put together all the jigsaw piece puzzles that can really help these companies, not just like they go into an accelerator program and they shoot at the other end and they're on their own. They're providing all the support pieces they need to help them grow and scale as they go through that, but also what they'll need afterwards as well. And out the back of that, we can help by being almost like a medium for a channel for government funding money to go through them, through the universities. And one of the most recent examples of that was we have an innovation district model here in Glasgow. And through that, the University of Glasgow has funded the first deep tech accelerator that's gone through the Stack program as well. And that's in areas like, early stage biotech. There's some quantum stuff in all there as well, and to give them what they need to get on that scale as well. So for me, that's a really good example of how we've managed to assemble the pieces, and you've got all the different layers or the different actors in the ecosystem coming together around one particular cluster area that we think that we can build consistency and profile in over time.
Cool. I'll go to your coming to you in a second, Richard. I have one question to add on to that. So how do you get startups to know about your programs, to if they want to be able to, work with Volvo locally, how do they actually connect with the council, with these companies? Is there a process in place for them to actually go to? I always find that sometimes there's a disconnect between resources that are available and startups actually knowing about them. So I'm curious how you maybe fill those gaps.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously Stack do their own promotion to a broad level. They have connections into a lot of networks and so on, but we have quite a sort of tight fit ecosystem over here where there's a lot of events and meetups that go on a regular basis. So you're always bumping into founders at all different stages in their journey and so on. And I think we can see our role as kind of super connectors in the ecosystem, where we can signpost people to the appropriate areas for them to fit in, because I think it can be quite daunting for early stage startups to go into that ecosystem. So where do I start? What I need funding? Do I need space? Do I need mentorship and so on? And I think one of our roles is to help around the edges of like I said, being able to join the dots for them and find out what's the most appropriate organization or support mechanism for them. And so, for example, I've helped put people on that program in Stack just through that serendipity of meeting them at various ecosystem events, understanding where they are and saying, well, it's worth you applying for that, because if you can get onto that program, not will that help you, but the connections you'll make out of that into potentially global players, and it'll help you potentially, attract investors as well, because they've thought about what is that complete rounded offer in terms of what startups need as they grow.
Richard?
Yes, about the second question or the first one?
Take your pick.
Okay, so maybe I'll choose the second one. So I believe that we have to modernize the way that we are providing support and grants and so on to our startups. So here in Canada in general, so there's a lot of grants for R&D activities. And all of these activities are related to universities, researchers, and so on. So I believe that we have to modernize the way that we provide grants to put more focus on adoption. So because at the end of the day, it's not a challenge of research, it's not a challenge of R&D, and technologies are evolving so fast. So we need to find new ways to accelerate the tech adoption, because each company cannot develop their own solution for their own purposes. If they are doing this, they are slowing down the pace of their own company. So how we can create more bridges between our startups who already have some solutions that they can deploy to some established companies who need to adopt some technologies to increase their productivity, and also create more connection. And if we need some researchers from universities and so on, so we have some programs to support this. And actually, it's not existing here in Canada. There's a few programs, but it's mainly focused on R&D activities. And one thing that I'm pushing right now is how we can create some research program or support to boost the product of our startups. So actually, universities are mainly accessible to established companies who have the budget to work with researchers to deploy new innovations and new technologies. So, but for a startup who already have something in their hands and they need some support to go deeper in what they are doing, if we are creating some program to boost their tech and use it as a springboard for tech transfer, I think this is the new way in the future to create more spin-off from universities. Yeah. It's a challenge everywhere, or in most countries or regions, how we are doing and accelerate and increasing tech transfer, but we already have some startups who are doing this. Yeah. So if we combine both, I think it will be faster.
Let me stay on that. So how are you interacting with the universities, right? Like, do you find that they're becoming more of a player in the ecosystem in terms of sort of the technology that's coming out, and how they're able to sort of foster at a R&D level more so than maybe through non-university? So how are you having those conversations, and how are you sort of getting all of them also on board in sort of this new way, I guess, if you will?
Yeah, it's always hard because it's more cultural. So universities are doing their things for so many years and they are doing well, but actually the problem is not on the research part. It's more related to the pacing. If we want to stay competitive, some regions, some countries, some cities understood that, and they create new ways to accelerate tech transfer. But today I'm on the tech scene for the last 10 years, and it's hard for me to follow new tools, new technologies, and so on, because it's going so fast. So, and the pacing of our universities is a little bit too slow. And sometimes we need some agile entities as startups to use them as a springboard, as I said, to do more tech transfers and at the end of the day, creating more economic value for our region. So we have to change it, and it's always hard because they don't have the DNA related to that.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head, which it's a cultural change to a large extent. What about you, Gavin? How are you working with the universities? How are they trying to help accelerate what's potentially happening at their level?
So our primary interface to the universities is through innovation districts. So we have an innovation district model here in Glasgow City region. We have 3 throughout the region, one in the centre of the city, one in the West End and South Side, and one out near the airport. And they're anchored by key university institutions like University of Glasgow and the University of Strathclyde, and that's both physical hubs, basically, but this where kind of companies and researchers and academia can come together. So our primary interface is through them. So we work very closely with them, not only in terms of prioritization of key sectors, but also on the spin-outs that are coming through those universities and into potentially some of our accelerator hubs to help commercialize that R&D as quickly as possible. But also we have funneled government funding through the innovation districts to create venture studios. So each one have got venture studio programs on particular areas that look at particular areas of strength that they can help commercialize. So that may be through, for example, in space, for example, how do we better commercialize space data that's pulled off of satellites, and how can that be then used to solve particular challenges within maybe climate or finance and so on. So again, helping to join those dots together to basically allow them to go into programs to make the connections they need, whether that be through international delegations or to the right institutions that can help them in their journey. So we work in a few different ways, but we find that innovation district model works really well because basically their raison d'etre and their objectives align very closely with what we're trying to do. We're trying to put Glasgow on the map for particular areas and to join those different pieces between, like I said, government, industry, and academia.
So that was my question too. So you mentioned these 8 target sectors. Are they aligned with the programs and types of classes that students would also take at the university?
A very broad level, yeah. I mean, some of them are, like I said, it's advanced manufacturing, it's life sciences, it's digital and enabling technologies, whatever that means, because that pretty much everything these days is digital and enabling technologies, right? But it also covers things like creative industries and so on as well. So yeah, very much there's courses and so on that fall out of that. But it's more about, I suppose, what the follow-on piece from that is, so obviously we closely monitor the kind of graduate outputs we get across the key disciplines and so on, but it's trying to sort of make sure that there's no gaps there. But I would say it broadly aligns with in terms of the agenda, in terms of what we're trying to do, what the universities, the universities, the innovation districts take a close look at where the investment money is going, into what particular areas, what particular skills, and then obviously talks to their individual heads of department about trying to make sure that the most appropriate courses or modules within those courses reflect what that's going to be. But as Richard mentioned earlier, things are moving so fast, especially with AI, trying to embed a lot of this stuff into the existing course, that kind of takes time and so on. So often people have to supplement their basic skills with micro-credentials as they go through their career, to make sure that they have all the pieces they need that's kind of reflecting the way that the market's going.
Cool. Richard, you mentioned at the beginning that Quebec is a smaller province. I think it's small but mighty. One of the things I've always found interesting about just Canada as a whole is it's a very global country in terms of people moving and working all over the place. And so, inevitably some companies will expand or, they have to go somewhere else for business purposes. And so, how do you, NRC, how does the community there help support growth outside of Canada for companies that are in your target sectors, but need to strategically go to other locations? Do you, have sister cities that you form relationships with, other programs that help sort of those companies expand?
Yeah, great question, especially this year. So because we had to make a major shift in the way that we are supporting our company to go global. So the Canadian economy is well embedded with the US economy.
Yep.
And if you followed last year or this year with the new president, it gave us a major challenge related to how we will support our company, our different companies to go global. So now one of the major challenges that we have here in Canada in general. So first of all, Canada is like 10 countries. So each province has their own reality. And our economy is not well integrated. So for us in Quebec to go in Ontario, for example, it's like to exporting something in another country. Same kind of regulation and so on. So we don't leverage the springboard of our own economy. So the habits that we had for the last 10, 20 years, that was to go directly to the US market because it's bigger and the economy is well embedded and so on. So, and use the US market as a springboard to scale our company. Now, the challenge that we have to diversify. So that means that we have to create different bridges for our companies, and we are looking mainly with Europe. For example, France, Germany, UK are mainly the main countries that we are looking to create more bridges. Scandinavian countries, because we have a similar environment, so in different perspective, and also the Asian market, so Singapore, Korea, and Japan. So that means that we have to deploy new strategies, new ways to support our company. And the other thing is when you come from a region with less than 50 million of citizens, you have to go global twice faster than other ones. So that means that we have to also accelerate the pace and support our companies earlier than what we were doing before the arrival of the new U.S. president.
Yep. Funny. Kevin, if you could implement one change in ecosystem in Glasgow for the better, right, like right now, to improve things, what would that be?
So for us at the moment, it's probably a policy thing. So I think we have the kind of talent. We've got sort of regular, consistent funding coming from government and VC investment as well. And we do have local governments. So I think the problem we've got at the moment is we need greater place devolution to Glasgow City region. We think that's vital for economic growth and for us to compete globally for investment and for talent. So we know we have the capability and the capacity to deliver, and we're trusted by government to do that. But we need new legislation that gives us kind of further legal and administrative powers to put us on an equal or an equitable footing with other comparable regions, certainly within the UK. So I would, reference maybe like Greater Manchester or West Midlands, who have a devolved authority and are getting appropriate funding and support packages, support from UK government. It's slightly complicated by the fact that we have a Scottish government and then a UK government. But on that, we have been lobbying for some time to get some movement on that. Certainly our senior team here has. And recently, within the last few weeks, Scottish Government recently announced that it will introduce new legislation in the next Scottish Parliament to enable the establishment of a legal entity for the region, to provide the foundation for a devolution deal. And that means further funding and powers coming to the region to allow us to make those decisions locally to grow the economy, because nobody knows the region better than we do. I think we just need a comparable package of it's not just funding but powers as well, so for things like transport and planning and so on in those areas, to give us that real flexibility to do the best that we can. So that's not a quick fix, but I would say the starting gun has been fired on that by Scottish Government. We're hoping both Scottish and UK Government will come together and put those practical measures in place to allow us to do that, because that really would open the doors in terms of what we could possibly do. So I would say it's a policy thing more than anything for us at the moment.
Yeah. Richard?
Yeah, as for us, it's mainly to modernize the procurement policies of our governments. So the best countries in the world who has a very good tech scene using the public procurement to leverage and use it as a springboard to develop their tech scene. And actually one of our challenges, so the policies in Canada and in Quebec in general are not accessible to our startups and our innovators. So we have to change and develop new ways, new trajectories to be sure that our startups has access to this leverage. And there's a lot of things happening right now because of the U.S. The relationship with the U.S. for the Canadian economy. There's a lot of changes right now, and I think the next few years will be better for our startups, and they will be more able to use the public procurement policies to have access to the public purchase funding.
Yeah, definitely. Put your money where your mouth is too when the government invests in stuff. Cool. One final question just to wrap it up, and then I'll leave it open for anybody that has any questions on their own. How do you feel about the future of Quebec, of Glasgow, in terms of viability, in terms of where it's going? Kind of an open question, but just sort of, what are your thoughts around the future of the ecosystem?
Richard, do you want me to?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do that. So I think I'm very optimistic about the future. When I feel that there's the momentum is really shifting here. Government has really lent in, both governments, to the innovation economy and be able to support that. More importantly, they've listened to what startups need. Often governments felt very remote from startups and they feel they're not being properly listened to. I think with the current administration, they have one of the ministers they have is a former startup founder and has created that communication channel between the startup community to really understand what they need. And we're starting to see changes being made at a national level, which over time will make a big difference. Yes, they can always go further and deeper, but I think that is really encouraging. I think often business gets quite frustrated with government in terms of not being reflecting what it really needs. So I think that is really good. I think from our perspective in Glasgow, we're one of the fastest growing tech hubs in the UK. We've had about £400 million investment over the last 3 years. We've got deep tech sector expertise in the areas where investment money is going, and we have good cluster and density of companies, net zero, space, health tech, quantum, which we think is going to be really interesting for the next 5 years. I think we've got the right infrastructure. We talked about the innovation district model. We've got sector-focused government catapults and innovation centres in the right areas, helping to bridge that link between academia, industry and government. And I think we've got a good quality or high quality, affordable city environment where people want to live, bring up families and grow their businesses. And we're trying to create the conditions for them to be able to do that. And I think as long as government trusts us to deliver, which I think we've been doing the last 5 years, I think that if we're given the governance levers, then I think the sky's the limit, to be honest.
So on my side, also optimistic because of two main things. So the first thing is we have a great tech talent pool. So we are very good in research. So per capita, Canada is one of the greatest countries in the world. So it's always ranked top 3 by different on different rankings. The other thing is because of what's going on with the US, all of our government is shifting the way that they are seeing the tech scene. So, and that's great. So that's provide a lot of new opportunities. So the challenge is to put in place all of these new regulations, program, and so on. But we know that there are some countries in the world who are doing very great stuff. So for example, I have some different countries who I'd like to be inspired by. The first one is Korea. So they have created a ministry of startup and SMEs. That's great. So that means that they have a very specific strategy regarding the tech sector. So that's great. And I'm pushing this here because if we are following this, it will be more clearer the way that we deploy our different initiatives. The other thing is how we can leverage public procurement. Singapore with the GovTech and also Estonia with the X-Road, very good example of what you can do. The other thing is how we can create more matching to accelerate tech adoption by established companies in Sweden. They are doing great stuff. So we can inspire our policies with related to what on what Swedish achieved on this. The other thing is for leveraging universities to create more deep tech companies. Aalto University in Finland, they are doing great. So the good news is actually our government is ready to shift a few things, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Some countries, some regions already achieve very great programs or initiatives and so on. So if we can accelerate the pace and deploy that kind of strategy, it can go fast.
Yeah. One of my takeaways is just listening to you guys' responses is sort of, with these new technology shifts comes cultural shifts, right? And it's harder for some than others to sort of, get behind these cultural shifts, whether it's university level, local government level, national level. And I think once those shifts happen, pretty cool stuff can actually happen and can get done. But half the battle is sort of having those conversations, getting people on board. Like you said earlier, Richard, getting people to understand the future of AI, right? Something that is kind of conceptual, or at the university level, right? Yeah, there's university that historically operated a certain way, and now there's more importance on spin-outs and R&D coming out of it, and how do you get them to sort of move at a faster pace, and then what kind of catalyst effect does that create along with that? And so I think it'll be interesting to see moving forward, as we're completely global society now, right? If no one believes that, we're totally global, right? And companies can locate anywhere. I firmly believe that too. And that's why I think this conversation is interesting, because it makes, fostering what you have from a sector standpoint even that much more important. But it also means that, understanding what's coming out, and how do you build the future? How do you make it resilient for your own communities? How do you work together at the local level with the universities, with other stakeholders, with partners, with national research councils, to make sense of all of this, and to make it really good for your communities and startups. So does anybody have any questions? Otherwise, we can wrap it up. Feel free to chat it in the box if you have any questions now, and we can ask. There were some comments, but no questions. Oh, wait, that's a few seconds. Any questions? Okay. No questions. All right. Well, this will be also on YouTube, so we'll post it and we'll recap it and send you all an email, so you can share it if you want, or rewatch it again. But yeah, thanks again to our guests. Super helpful, super interesting perspective, both European, Canadian, both sort of a lot of similarities. That hopefully you guys can take away some best practices, and feel free to connect also with our. Oh wait, we have a question. Go ahead. You can just chat it, since I think you're muted. Someone says, how do you collect startup needs?
Very good question. So do you want to go first, Gagan?
Well, Scottish Government is trying to do it through surveys and so on, but I think you only get half the story there. I think half that you got to get it from the horse's mouth, and I think a lot of this stuff emerges through the general events and meetups that we have in the city region on a regular level. We kind of create the conditions to support us getting together as often as we can. I think a lot of the stuff you do here on the ground. I think you have to also be prepared for pretty frank and open exchanges between the different actors as well. Sometimes we're all super polite, but I think and the things that are not going well, I think we need to be quite honest about that, where we're strong, where the gaps are, and how we can close that. But we try and create those conditions. We had a big ecosystem exchange event last week. It took place, which is sort of wrap up the year. But before we had that in the afternoon, we brought together a bunch of kind of hand-picked investors and startups and ecosystem players as well, to sort of, to air some of those big questions about, where could we do better and which areas can we fill in. I think we also need to have that honesty and understand what we can do better. So as long as we have that open dialogue, I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, on my side, there's always 4 pillars that we are looking for, and try to have a better understanding on what's going on. So a startup is always looking for 4 elements. The first one is market clients. So how we can support our startups to be more connected and expand their sales to true clients. So we need markets, local markets, and also global markets. The second thing is our companies need funding. So the best funding comes from the clients, but also we have grants, we have investors, and so on. So how we can create a better environment for our startups to provide them the right access to the right funding for what they want to achieve and what they need. The third pillar is the talent. So you need specialized talent if you are on the tech scene. So sometimes it's just for a one time, just to help these startups to have a better understanding of on a specific thing, or expanding their own team by attracting very specific profile. And the fourth pillar is the access to strategic infrastructures. So power computing, laboratories, and so on. So, and when I'm doing some recommendation and things like these, so I'm always looking around these 4 pillars. So startup is not looking for an incubator. Startup is not looking for mentors. A startup is not looking for coaches. Startup is not looking for free offices. A startup is looking for people, organizations that can help them to have access to these 4 pillars. And this is the way that we are working and trying to do a better analysis of what our startup needs.
Well, last question, Raphael asked, do you think there's a difference between creating a startup ecosystem and a scale-up ecosystem?
Major difference.
Yeah.
So, and I think sometimes some startups doesn't understand what they need to scale. So when you are startups, what we are teaching to our startup is do lean startups, iterate with your client, validating. When it's time to scale, you have to stop to do this. And some startup doesn't do the shift. They are always staying in the mindset of iterating with the client and personalizing what they are doing. So if you want to scale, sometimes you need to define, this is the product that can help me to scale, and how many people with this profile will buy it as it is. And now you can scale. If you are staying in the startup mode by always iterating, you will not scale. You will attract clients, but it's impossible to scale. You're on mute, Darren.
Classic. Final words, Gavin?
Yeah, I think we recognise that there's a scale-up gap within the UK and within Scotland. There's a big report went out about last month called Scaling Scotland, trying to identify what are the kind of key areas we need to look at. And it was written by former COO of Skyscanner, one of Scotland's few unicorns, so he knows what he's talking about, one of the big scaling companies, a guy called Shane Christopherson. And it kind of identified what the areas are they need to look at, and one is around business capability, which is, building stronger management, leadership, and strategic skills, for people that are equipped to be able to scale their businesses. One is around talent and attracting and retaining world-class leaders and teams that then feed back to the ecosystem. One is on funding for scale-up. Often we've run out of scale-up money in Scotland and the UK, and the people have to go to the US to get that level of. So I think it's about reforming public co-investment, improving access to growth capital. And then the final piece probably around market expansion, about how do we support internationalization and global attraction of talent. So there's a number of big pieces in there, but this is the first step is understanding where the problem is and trying to put in the actions to help address that. But it is a challenge.
Yeah, and you have to accept that you need another skill set to grow. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for joining. I thought it was a really, really good session, a lot of good takeaways. And again, we'll post this, and so you can rewatch it on YouTube. If you have any questions, feel free to connect with our speakers, LinkedIn, etc. And yeah, thanks again, guys. Wishing everybody a really good holiday as well.